What is good, everyone? Welcome to the show. Thank you so much for checking out the breakdown. We're going to do a little bit something different here today. We're going to do something a little bit different here today. We're going to take a look at systemic racism, whether you believe it exists or not. I am appreciative of the couple here that I'm going to highlight, and we're going to take a look at what they think and what they have heard and feel about the idea and concept of systemic racism. Before I dive into it, let me put this on the screen here, and I really highly suggest that people go over here and read this book here. It's called When Affirmative Action Was White, an old untold history of racial inequality in 20th century America. It's available on multiple platforms, including Kindle, an audiobook written by Ira Katznelson. So go over there and check that out. So, highlight that, download it to your audiobook. You're going out for a walk, listen to it, or whatever. So I think it is. I think it's very enlightening and helps to give a greater context as to the conversation that we're about to listen to right here. So I'm claiming fair use, and I'm going to do reaction to this. I am definitely once again appreciative of this couple doing this episode here. So put this on the screen here. And this is titled The Inheritance of Inequality, How Systemic Racism Persists. And this is the Talking Politics with Mom podcast. And so, there's this idea going around, and there's always this idea going around that Black folks are just lazy, slow, inherently deficient, innately deficient, etc. And so this podcast breaks down in a manner that is coherent what happened to Black people. So, when Black folks talk like this, always nobody listens. But they're here. But here's a white couple who are going to break it down. So we're going to take a listen to them. I'm going to put the speed up. It's a 27-minute video. Don't know if I'll play the whole thing, but I would definitely want to get through most of it. 1.25. We'll start there. I might play it a little bit faster. You can always go over to this episode and listen to it in its entirety. And this is a clip that they did of a longer episode. I think it's like 2 hours. I've only listened to this. I didn't listen to the whole segment here. So here we go.
And the white people are on one side and the Black people are on the other side. The Black guy looks over to the white starting line, and all these white people have jetpacks. And he's like, how come I don't have a jetpack? Where'd you get that jetpack?
And in this analogy, it's on your marks, get set, go. And the first 244 years, the Black person is based on...
I don't know why people do that introduction stuff. I really can't stand that. All right. I don't want to freeze it there. Hold on. Let me get my headphones here.
Have the jetpack, but when the race starts, we have to stop care of her now.
The history of this country and the building of the middle class is based on massive government investments in wealth building for the people. When did you become aware of that history in your trajectory of rejecting conservatism? When did you learn about, the Homestead Act, the GI Bill, the VA home loans, the VA business loans? When did you learn about the massive amount of government spending that was given to some people and not others? And how did that affect your views?
Well, I'm going to tell you something.
So she said the question was rejecting conservatism. Interesting concept there. I don't know her politics, but she's apparently someone here, right? Let me rewind this here. 124. Let me get her name here. I don't know her name. Adrienne Larkin.
I didn't know how restrictive a lot of those programs were until you told me. And I consider myself somebody who cares about that thing. But it certainly wasn't in my history books. And I had no idea. I really believed in equality. I thought everybody should get a fair shot. I knew a little bit about the GI Bill because I had family that fought in the Second World War. And I thought, they fought for all of us. The least we can do is make sure that when they come home, they get a good education, because education was very big in my family. I would have been furious to find out that the Black GIs, didn't get to go to college, and they didn't get to buy a house for nothing down, and they didn't get any of those benefits. I was like, why? Their blood.
All right, so I want to spotlight this lady here. So this comes from. Let me pause this here. I remove that here. Let's stop screen share. Just to know who this lady is who we're listening to. Mercy University Alumni Relations, the College of New Rochelle, Introductory Reflection. This goes on here. Spotlight interview, Adrian Larkin, SAS 68. Adrian Larkin's SAS 68 credits her 4-year experience as an undergrad at the College of New Rochelle with teaching her importance of service. As a student body president in the fall of 67, she coordinated a service project in which CNR students baked, wrapped, and mailed thousands of cookies to U.S. Marine Rifle Company in South Vietnam, whose officer had asked for a bit of Christmas cheer for his soldiers. So this is a little bit about her. You can pause this and read all this. I'm not going to read it here. That was pretty much the only information I could find about her. Yeah, that was pretty much the only information I could find about her. There was a Facebook, but I don't like putting people's Facebooks out there. There was an Adrian Larkin who had a PhD on LinkedIn, but there's no pictures. I can't see if that's her. So anyway, so I don't know if she ran for political office or what her thoughts are about any of that. So, and this guy is William Gord. Okay, the only other thing I could find is that possibly Will Gord is a director of some sort, and he and his mother have been having this podcast talking politics with mom for some time. I don't know any of their other backgrounds besides that, but anyway, this is an interesting episode, so we'll jump back into it here.
To some people and not others, and how did that affect your views?
Well, I'm going to tell you something. I didn't know how restrictive a lot of those programs were until you told me. And I consider myself somebody who cares about that thing. But it certainly wasn't in my history books. And I had no idea. I really believed in equality. I thought everybody should get a fair shot. I knew a little bit about the GI Bill because I had family that fought in the Second World War. And I thought, they fought for all of us. The least we can do is make sure that when they come home, they get a good education, because education was very big in my family. I would have been furious to find out that the black GIs, didn't get to go to college. And they
All right, I'm having some technical difficulties here.
They fought for all of us. The least we can do is make sure that when they come home, they get a good education, because education was very big in my family. I would have been furious to find out that the black GIs, didn't get to go to college, and they didn't get to buy a house for nothing down, and they didn't get any of those benefits. I was like, why? They're black.
Trying to speed this up here because they're talking a little bit slow here. All right, we're going to try to speed this up here to 1.5 speed. Hopefully it's not too fast, but I want to get through it, and their pace is a little slow for me.
Any of those benefits. I was like, why? Their blood looks about as red as everybody else's last time I checked.
The history of these big government programs is that they were written in such a way and administered in such a way that specifically Southern states run by the Dixiecrats could cut black people out of the deal. So, in the initial days when Social Security was created and unemployment insurance was created, they made carve-outs. Domestic servants, agricultural workers, weren't eligible for unemployment or Social Security at the beginning. That later changed.
I think I knew that, but much later.
Mm-hmm.
It was invisible. Where are you going to learn about that? I didn't learn about it in my history book. My parents probably didn't know about it. It's not like the Democrats were like, you can't do that because they cut the deal.
Right. Yes,
so
it was a deal cut between Roosevelt and the Dixiecrats. These policies on balance were good. They just did not include everybody. Right.
Well, Roosevelt was, he's in the 30s and the 40s. He's, 60, 70 years from the end of the Civil War.
Keep in mind here what they're discussing here, and I'm wearing my police hat from my time in the PD. My thoughts and opinions here are mine and not mine of my former department. Of course, I'm retired now. But let me just say that they're talking about, how, you talk about wealth inequality, talk about the amount of money that, and I don't know the stats offhand off the top of my head, but something like the average white household, let's just say if it's $100,000 of wealth between their homes and stocks and bonds and retirement saving, let's just say it's $100,000. There is some more accurate numbers about that. It's something like 10,000 for Black families, and what they are discussing is how this inequality came to be. Talking about bootstraps and pick yourself up and the ethics of hard work. There's another book that I may highlight talking about that. It's called Back of the Line. Somebody just turned me on to that, and you all ought to read that as well. So, so this is what we're talking about here. So we'll keep it going.
I mean, he is well within living memory of the Civil War, and Jim Crow was so powerful, and he knew he was cutting dirty deals that were wrong, but he figured half a loaf is better than no loaf. I mean, his wife didn't think so. But after a while, that's no excuse. There's just no excuse for it. And I think a lot of people would be outraged. And I would say that 99% of Americans, including probably most people who consider themselves progressive, have no idea that went on. And I think it's kind of, if you told people that now, I think a lot of people would be angry, but they would say, well, I didn't do it. But it's kind of like if you had this race and everybody's at the starting line and the white people are on one side and the black people are on the other side. And the black guy looks over to the white starting line and all these white people have jetpacks on their back.
Yeah.
And he's like, how come I don't have a jetpack? Where'd you get that jetpack?
Yeah. And in this analogy, it's on your marks, get set, go. And the first 244 years, the black person can't even move.
Yeah. Well, they got rocks in their pocket also.
Yes.
That's like, doesn't everyone have rocks in their pocket? Like, no, they don't have. So the white guy with the jetpack is like, I don't know, this family has always had it. So you go and you look at the jetpack and it says, GI Bill.
Yeah.
It says the New Deal. It says Social Security. And he says, I guess that's why, because we never got any of those things. And, you had the jetpack and your grandfather who fought in the war was able to buy a house. And then he raised his kids and they inherited the house and they sold it and made a lot of money and bought a house for every single one of you. That's why. And now all your kids have the jetpack. But we don't, not only do we not have the jetpack, but when the race starts, we have to stop at a certain point and go back and get our grandmother because she had never gotten nothing. And I got to take care of her now.
Yeah.
And plus I have rocks in my pocket.
Mm-hmm. All of these efforts to ban books, to ban the teaching of critical race theory in school, that's the point of them. They don't want people to learn the history that different groups of people, based on phenotypic characteristics, some groups were given advantages that allowed them to inherit and build and grow intergenerational wealth, and another group was denied that opportunity. They don't want.
So I want to highlight here. I want to really press this point home because this is very, very important for us to understand as we go through this here. So I think this is on we'll add this to the screen here. Share screen. This comes from the Washington Post. The black-white economic divide is as wide as it was in 1968, and this is from June 2020. And I want to show this particular graph here. White wealth surges, black wealth stagnates. Median household wealth adjusted for inflation. White households in 2016 had 149,703, black 13,000. Now, of course, when we look at the top 1%, that's probably inflating their numbers even more. And again, this was back in 2010. So, I can imagine, with those who are in the top 1% are really probably pulling up everyone else. So it's probably less than that. But you guys can go over to the Washington Post and read this article, but I wanted to highlight this. And part of this reason is exactly what they are talking about here is that this comes from the GI Bill. This comes from all the other government handouts, and that African American folks were denied. So we'll continue with this.
Want that being taught to this day. And so still the language is we want equal opportunity. We don't want equal outcomes. Of course, the irony of that is that not everyone starts at the same place. So to say that you're having equal opportunity assumes that the playing field is level from the beginning. You were talking to me the other night as we were preparing for this about some of your first jobs that you got.
Oh yeah, let's talk about my first jobs. So I got home from college my first year, and I go to Manhattan and apply for the help wanted women. You could either be a secretary, a file clerk, a waitress. I was probably not very good at any of those things. And so after I was very unsuccessful, my mother picked up the phone and called my uncle and said, "Peter, my daughter needs a job." And so the next day I was working at a bank in Manhattan, just like that, And then the next job I got, my father gave me a job working for him in his hospital. right? And then when I was in law school, I needed a job after my first year because you couldn't work for law firms in those days. And my mother said, okay, let me think. She picks up the phone and calls somebody that she played golf with. My mother was a scratch golfer. She was awesome. And she said, my daughter needs a summer job. She lives in Los Angeles. And the guy says, okay, send the resume. So send the resume. I mean, my resume was like, yeah, all right. A week later, I had a job at one of the biggest corporations in the world. Was I better than all the thousands of resumes they got? I doubt it. But my mother knew a guy who turned out to be one of the major vice presidents in that because they played golf together. And so I had access to all this stuff. I'm like, did I get those jobs because I was the best?
This particular concept, I didn't mean to pause it right there. This particular concept that she's speaking about, this looks terrible here, but this particular concept that she's speaking about, this ability to call other folks for jobs, this networking type of thing. I addressed that. There was a guy, Tim Wise. If you know who Tim Wise is, he's an anti-racist public speaker. So there was a question and answer in a speech that he gave, and I asked this particular question. How do you solve with the elimination? This is before the elimination of DEI. I'm pretty sure it was, but I think it was in the works and being talked about. Certainly, but by this time, the Supreme Court had struck down the affirmative action acceptance for college students, right? So we were at that point, but not at the point of DEI being eliminated. So I asked a question about, this hookup that she got, that she was able to call her uncle, who, call a guy who knows a guy, whatever. African folks, African diasporic people, African Americans, whatever you want to call us, were denied those types of things. Not only could we not go to the school to make the connections, not only could we not get hired because of the color of our skin to make the connections, right? So those are two different things. And Tim Wise, with all of his racist, I'm not saying this is pejorative, but all of his anti-racist rhetoric, all of his speeches, he didn't have an answer for that. There is no way to solve for that. So you take away affirmative action, you take away DEI, as they're talking about here, you take away, every other program that is designed to get people a leg up, and African Americans are going to be in the bottom of the boat. She's talking about her resume. There's been studies, I'm quite sure you all are well read. There have been studies where you have an African sounding name and you have someone with a white sounding name. They're going to go with the white sounding name. Even if the resume shows that the person has been arrested and convicted before, they're still not going to hire the black person. I was reading through another YouTube video similar to what I'm doing right now, and somebody in the comment section said their boss told them one time that if somebody has a black name, just throw it right in the trash for an application or a resume. This is what we're dealing with, right? So this is why DEI was important and affirmative action was important. I'm not saying that I absolutely agree with 100% of what it was, because the greatest beneficiaries of both of those programs were white women. But it was designed, the original intent was, people are racist. People are going to hire who they love, hire who they know. People can pick up the phone and make a phone call. This is the way the world works. Like it or not, this is the way the world works. You're going to hire your friends. You're going to hire somebody from the old country. Again, read that book, Back of the Line. Can't remember the author's name. But this is what's going on out here. And this is what we got to deal with here. So.
No. Anybody could have done some of those jobs, but I got them because I was connected, and I was connected because my parents had opportunities, because they got jobs from the Work Progress Administration during the Depression, because they got cheap home loans, because they weren't banned from neighborhoods because of their skin color. I mean, they got lots of advantages that they passed on to me.
And then you pass those on to me. And
it's easy to say, well, everyone should have equal opportunity. They should, but what the hell does that mean?
Right.
If I had gone to my white friends and said, you think that getting a public school education is equal opportunity, would you like to go to the black school in the area? Would you like to go there? And they're like, oh, hell no, the paint is peeling and the textbooks are like 10 years old. I don't want to go there. Well, how is that equal opportunity? Just because they go to the same, to public education? One is completely thrown in the garbage, by the, they don't get enough money. Nobody takes care of it. It's not equal. Come on. Don't be stupid. That's just stupid. That's just lying. Or just it's just like not using your head. Like, what do you want to achieve? Do you want people to really, like everybody has the same opportunity? Well, then they have to have the same opportunity for a long time. It's just not like, you can't just say, today we're at the starting line and I have a jetpack and you have rocks in your pocket and no jetpack, but we have the equal opportunity to win. No, you don't. You have to do something to give those people the jetpacks. And then they'll see that in that race, a lot of people on the other side of that line will kick your ass.
It's amazing to me that the history is that one group of people got all the advantages, another didn't get any. And then when you say we want to try to redress some of the harm that has been done, suddenly they're getting undeserved, unfair advantages. It's just such an insidious idea.
You took from every American who paid taxes to give GIs free college, to give them no down payment loans and all the other things that you get in the GI Bill. So what? They gave everything to all of us. I think we owed it to them. And if you're going to give it to them, and the question is, they should give them to everybody. And if they don't, they have given an unfair advantage to one group. And it diminishes the moral integrity of both. You're right, it does, but not for the reasons that you think.
Essentially, what we're talking about in many.
All right, forgive me, I had a little snafu there. This is the book I'm talking about, Back of the Hiring Line. So it's on Audible, Kindle, all these different platforms. Read that. And this talks about the immigration issue or problem and how it has always undercut African Americans the most. So go over there and check that book out as well. Back to what we're talking about here.
Ways is the myth of the meritocracy.
There's a lot of invisible history that needs to be made visible, and people will understand what the hell is going on better if they really understand what happened before. And that takes work. It's not something that government can do. It's something that Ken Burns can do.
Or we can do.
Or we can do. You can tell a story about how people get ahead. And it's a good story. It's a good American story. I mean, the story of my family is a good American story. My mother got a job with the WPA. All of her siblings did. When they were starving, my grandmother was completely illiterate. She had no marketable skills except washerwoman. Those jobs during the Depression saved them. It gave them the possibility of eventually going to college where they got scholarships, and they couldn't have gone without scholarships, and that gave them the opportunity to follow whatever they were good at. And my mother was good at being smart, and she ended up taking her smart degree and going to a hospital and working there. And she met a guy who was a doctor, and that gave, and then he bought a house because he got a good interest rate, and then he could afford it. And then he had, a family that includes a lawyer and a doctor and, 2 other siblings who were really successful, and their kids are wonderful and successful. And it also, and he gave his kids jobs, and the parents made sure that kids got jobs. That's a good American story. And stop telling us that we didn't get a hand up on the way up, because we did. And that's good. And everybody should have got it, but everybody didn't get it. And now what are you going to do about it? You got to do something.
The other thing, of course, about the GI Bill, the way that it was.
You got to do something about it. Listen, I'm just going to sit back here and just let them cook, because I think that they're doing a fantastic job of breaking this down.
Implemented is that it was written in a way to accommodate Jim Crow, because it was administered at the state level. And so I did a little research last night specifically into the area where you grew up, and found that in the New York and northern New Jersey suburbs, 67,000 mortgages were insured by the GI Bill, but fewer than 100 were taken out by non-whites.
Oh my God. 100?
Less than 100.
100.
Yes, out of 67,000.
The book that I talked about when affirmative action was white breaks down similar numbers to that. Something like, it's been a while since I read it, something like 96 or 98% of those of the GI Bill were all white. So, what does that do? You think about the housing market and how that builds equity. If you bought a house, they're going to break this down. But if you bought a house for something like $5,000 or $10,000 in these times, 1960s, 1970s, right? And you've done the upkeep and everything in the area where you live, that house is now can be worth $250,000, $500,000, $1 million. And that is building generational wealth. And this is how Black folks have been excluded from this. From this.
Mortgages.
I mean, the GI Bill, I don't know if it was true then, but it's true, now that these were no down payment loans. You did not have to come up with a down payment. And that's the thing that is one of the largest bars to home ownership.
Yeah.
So it wasn't because people couldn't afford it. It was because people just were denied it. In my family's deed, there was a clause that said, you are forbidden from selling this house to a Black person. Now, I don't remember what the penalty was, whether you just lost possession of the house and it went back to the person that you bought it from, or whether the contract was just null and void. I don't remember. I made my mother show me the deed when I was in law school. I said, is there a restrictive covenant in this? And there was.
Right. I mean, Levittown is one of the, most iconic examples of the suburban neighborhood that was being built. All of those houses were being backed by federal government loans that if they defaulted, the federal government would cover them. And in the contract that Levitt made with the federal government, there were explicit terms that none of the homes would be sold to Black people and none of the homes would be resold to Black people in the future.
And that was illegal, by the way. It had been illegal since 1947 to put a restrictive covenant in a deed. But there was one in my parents' deed, and that was sold in 1949. So it was just ignored. I mean, that's the government saying, we don't want you to prosper. That's what it's saying.
If you think about the enduring impact of that today, think about a family that gets a no interest loan on a home at that time.
No down payment.
No down payment, but low interest probably. But in any case, they're getting a benefit from the federal government to help them own a home, which appreciates and can be passed down generation over generation. Think about how much wealth was federally subsidized specifically to those white GIs and denied to all the other Black people who should have been able to benefit from those programs, but were denied it.
I mean, one of my relatives bought a house in a very nice suburb of Westchester for $4,000. No down payment required. That house is worth over $1 million right now, well over $1 million. They owned it free and clear most of their lives because it was so cheap. So their family is financially secure now, and will be for like 2 generations. Anybody could afford, a mortgage payment of $100 a month or $70 a month, which was kind of what it would be. The 50s was an anomaly. It was a blip, but it was also the result, like you say, of a massive investment by the government in the middle class, in establishing a white middle class.
Yes.
I mean, it was deliberate. It was massive. It was almost like the Marshall Plan, which we had for rebuilding Europe. It was really like that for the United States. I'm all about that. I think we could go back to having a new, massive investment in the middle class like we did in the 1950s. I think we need that right now.
The irony of...
So I want to highlight here something. Take this down here. I want to highlight here something. I got to break this up to make it more, stop screen share. Let me put this up here. So there's a book that I was reading, and I wanted to see if it was on my Kindle. I know it's on my Audible, but I don't know if it was on my Kindle. So, but I came across these 2 books by Heather McDonald. I have not read them yet. I did read another book by Heather McDonald, and this one says, When Race Trumps Merit and the Diversity Delusion, right? I have not read them yet, so I can't really critique on them. They are in my Kindle to read, but I will get to them as soon as I can. So, but it's, I don't know if Heather McDonald, and she wrote another book, something about law enforcement here. I don't know where it is. Here's her other book, The War on Cops, right? Not an overly impressive book in all honesty. I'm not overly impressed with that particular book, but she seems to get a lot of attention, Heather McDonald, and people seem to love. It might even put this up. Yeah, it's her. So I'm not overly impressed with that. So I did buy these 2 books to give this a fair shake. But I've also, as I mentioned, read those other 2 books. Highly impressed by them. I will get to Race Trumps Merit and Diversity Delusion to get another side of the story and what they're telling. And nobody's saying that we ought to hire people who are unqualified. Nobody's saying that. Nobody's saying we ought to hire, if there's a white male with a college degree and there's a Black male with a college degree, they both have, or a Black man with no college degree. This isn't even a question. The question is, as has been laid out, when do you get the leg up? What gives you the leg up? And if it's connections, well, these connections have been built over time. How do you rectify that situation? Tim Wise didn't have the answer for it. And I'm sure that Heather McDonald, I'm sure she won't be able to address that. How do you give a man with no credit, with no background, no hookups, no one to call, how do you give that person a leg up into the middle class? And generally, it's come through government programs, because the government has been the least racist when hiring folks. Right, I got hired under a civil service. Right, there was a test, and it was just raw scores. You passed the test, you passed the background. This is what you got. When we took examinations for elevation and for to become supervisors, it was all based on merit. So, and as she said, sometimes you get your butt kicked, and that's what they didn't want. So they intentionally created these covenants. And I was looking for another book that I was reading. I was definitely audio booking it. It's in my Audible library, talking about the same thing. That's how I came across this. So we'll get back to it here. I'd love to know your thoughts, your opinions. Share screen, inheritance. Here we go.
This era is that MAGA, Make America Great Again movement, harkens back to the 1950s because they see the regimented social structure and hierarchies
Right.
and want that back. But there's actually a lot to learn from the 1950s. Here are some other stats about this era that are pretty jaw-dropping. The top income tax rate was 91% for income over $200,000. The level of income inequality was so much less in the 1950s than it is today. The union membership was the highest that it had ever been in the nation's history. About
Right.
1/3 of workers were in unions. You've also got the highway expansion, which was, you know, the biggest government infrastructure program in history. You've got proof of concept.
No, some of those were, you know, they bulldozed black homes to build the highways, but you know, but
That investment in people works. The only thing was a whole bunch of people, including black people and women, were left out of that deal. And so
Yeah.
the interesting thing that happens next is when those constituencies start saying, hey, we want our piece of the pie, then suddenly support for this type of role of government starts to erode.
You know, this was invisible to people. I mean,
same thing, you know, when we talk about healthcare, you know, they did surveys and talked to people and said, you know, here's Obamacare. Are you in favor of Obamacare or this program where they give you this, that, and here's, you know, pay your this and that? Oh yeah, we'll take the second one. It was just about race in Obamacare. They just didn't like that because it came from this particular person. There's been other studies as well talking about you know, that they just don't want these entitlements. I've heard members of the Klan saying it, or even those on the alt-right and all that kind of stuff saying it. Listen, we don't mind the entitlements. We just don't want these people to get it. That's what it's all about. That's what it's all about.
just like I grew up in one of the most diverse, gigantic cities in the world, in New York, but it was the multiculturalism in some ways was invisible to me, you know, because I didn't experience it in my life. And when people don't think about that when they think about the 50s, and they certainly don't think about the massive government investment that made the 50s possible.
I mean, I'm all for going back to a lot of these policies. They were more progressive than we have now. The problem was they only existed for certain people. They didn't include everyone in the bargain. I want to know what your opinion on this is. So, I mean, this is kind of a question about human nature. But what's your take on the fact that suddenly when black people and women said, hey, we want to be cut in on the deal that you've been giving exclusively or almost exclusively to white men, when you do that, suddenly they're like, well, then no one can have it. It's so self-defeating, of course, because suddenly you're opposing programs that would help you because other people would also benefit from it.
These programs are so
There was a study that was conducted stating very similar things. I'm not gonna be able to find it, but I'll try to look for it when I pull this up here. All right, I completely lost my train of thought there. Forgive me. I took a moment there to look for those particular articles that I was speaking about, but I couldn't find them. I knew I wouldn't be able to, but we'll continue on with
invisible
this.
to most people. They don't realize how much they benefit from them. And when the programs are announced as expansions of existing policies, like this program exists, but now we're going to include women and we're going to include black people and all this, all they hear is women and black people. They don't hear the other part. They don't experience the other part in their lives, and nobody points it out to them. Republicans are happy not to point it out because they want to get rid of the program anyway, and they want to turn the races against each other because it's very profitable for them to stay in power with their diminishing base of support. People are so brainwashed into thinking that everything they did, they earned without the help of the government. The government never gave them a hands up. You remember in 2010 when they were opposing Obamacare and these women would have these signs that said, hands off my Medicare.
Keep your government hands off
Government
my
hands
Medicare.
off my Medicare, as if they didn't even realize that Medicare was an entitlement program. They had no idea. And I really fault the Democratic Party. What a bunch of idiots in terms of marketing.
The other side of the coin to Democrats being bad at marketing their policies
They weren't bad at it. They agreed with it. They didn't care. They didn't want them to have it either.
is that Republicans have been very good at demonizing their policies. They've made it so that welfare is synonymous with poor black people that are getting undeserved help. They've made it so that any government assistance is looked at as unfair money going to undeserving people, even though, as we just mentioned, those massive government investments in the 1950s are what essentially created the American middle class in the first place. I mean, it's what W.E.B. Du Bois calls the psychological wages of whiteness. It's the idea that there's a hidden wage that comes with the knowledge that you're higher on the pecking order, on the social ladder, that if you have this notion that you're above another person, that there's a psychological wage. It's not actual money, but it takes the form of a wage, and that people are not willing to let go of those psychological wages of superiority. And I think that's what these reactionary politicians are playing on that desire of people to be higher on the social economic ladder than other people.
To me, it's not even you're higher. It's just not you're just not lower. You're not on the bottom.
Right.
You're not the one who's on the very bottom. You want someone to be below you. You're trying to climb the social ladder, but really while you're climbing it, it would be good that someone else is on the bottom. I mean, it's a human trait, but they're always looking in the wrong direction. They should be looking up the ladder instead of down the ladder.
Heather McGhee wrote this great book called The Sum of Us, where she sort of talks about this formula that had been created for prosperity, but that was denied certain groups of people. And she talks about this story of a public pool that had been funded through, New Deal programs, funded through the tax dollars of everyone, that were only available to the white citizens. And then as soon as, judges desegregated access to those pools, instead of allowing everyone to swim, they just drained the pools so no one could swim.
Right.
And I feel like that's what happened.
That's the study there. Well, that's a particular case, but there is a study identifying the same thing. And it was a shared study in which I can't remember. I can't recall. I read it years ago. I actually talked about it in one of the classes I teach at. But anyway, I don't want to belabor the time. But the exact study or point that they're making is exactly what was demonstrated in the study, that they would rather have nothing than have someone else have half of what they have. So, yeah, crazy.
And across all of these policies is that suddenly when women and Black people and other groups that had been denied these benefits said, we want ours, then suddenly no one could have it.
Also because they had theirs now. Then they had already had theirs, so they didn't care. But now their kids are in the same position, that the vets were returning from the war. If it weren't for government intervention, if it wasn't for, policies that promoted union membership and job training and the GI Bill that paid for your college and the VA loans that you could buy, you would zero down. You wouldn't have the 50s. You wouldn't have had the 50s. You would have had a lot of soldiers who are just really, really poor going back to their farms and going back to their dead-end jobs and going back to their, minimum wage jobs. But the government said, no, we want to do something very different. We want to invest in, a rising middle class. I'm all about that. The 50s would never have happened without that. We really need that massive investment in our kids and our middle class now, just like we had then.
Just this time, cut everyone in on the deal. Thanks so much for watching.
So that's that. I can't find that study. It's gonna bother me. So maybe if I get it, I'll put the link in here. But there was a study demonstrating that they would rather have, if somebody was given half of something. I gotta figure out how to phrase this so I can get it. If somebody would have something and the other person was going to get half, they would rather take the nothing, and so the other person couldn't get half of what they had. So if anybody, I can't recall the study, but anyway, here is something I did find. Economic scarcity alters race perception. So in other words, what this study is saying is that when and if there's economic scarcity, right, that people turn on each other, and this is why they keep the amount of things that we have at such low levels. So we turn on each other, and the Black folks get a little blacker, right? They get more ethnic, right? They see them more. Oh, there's not enough money to go around. They're cutting back on welfare. There's not enough jobs. There's education. Now the Black folks get a little blacker, right? So, all right. So I thought that was great. I thank them for doing this. I appreciate them talking about it, because when us folks talk about it, we're crying and whining and, pick yourself up by your bootstraps and stop begging for handouts, et cetera, et cetera. But everybody else got them. And as Adrian said, our blood is just as red, and we fought for this country just as much in every single war, from the Revolutionary War to the Civil War, to the Spanish War, to World War I, World War II, to Korean War, Vietnam. We were all in all these other wars and skirmishes that we're continuing to have, War of 1812 and all that kind of stuff. So how come we didn't get the bennies and goodies? And we can see the economic progression from there. All right, let me know your thoughts and your opinions. Hit me in the comment section. Much love and peace.